And we'll continue then to bring you more reaction to that particular story. But there is another story that is making news this evening. This is the Judicial Service Commission recommending Gauteng Judge President Dunstan Mlambo to become the next Deputy Chief Justice of South Africa. There were 3 candidates in this who were being interviewed for this particular position. So let us talk about this now and exactly what does it mean for the judiciary going forward. We speak to Judges Matter Researcher and Advocacy Officer Mbekezeli Benjamin. Finally, we get to have you in studio. Thank you for coming in. And let's first start with just your thoughts. I mean, looking at the 3 different interviews, was he the best pick?
Good evening, Bongi, and good evening to the viewers. Judge President Mlambo did give, I think, the strongest and most compelling vision of what he intends to do as Deputy Judge President. And one of the most important things, he drew from things that he's already done. So he mentioned that he was leader of the Labour Court and he managed to turn that court around. Obviously, he was the head of the Gauteng province, and he said he put in initiatives to ensure efficiency and make sure that people get access to justice faster. But the most interesting part, he made mention of his tenure as the chairperson of the board of Legal Aid South Africa, which has a budget of about 2 billion rands. And so he made the point that if he was able to manage a 2 billion rand institution in legal aid, then the judiciary, which has a similar budget, would also be something that he would be familiar and be able to lead. And
when you think of another matter, particularly that speaks about his bravery, right? It's, him and the Judge President Musi being part of that delegation to then go and start the conversation, particularly around the independence, the operational independence and budgetary independence of the judiciary, a matter that we're still discussing to this day, and it's of huge importance.
It's extremely important, Bongiwe. Actually, for the last 20 years, the judiciary has been trying to get the executive to understand why it's important that the institutional independence of the judiciary is guaranteed. And the remarkable thing is that all 3 candidates for Chief Justice were present at that meeting. But it seems as if Judge President Mlambo was given this role to explain why this institutional independence is necessary. And it seems as if the delegation managed to persuade the president, and which is why 2 weeks ago he announced it. And earlier this week, the minister also announced that they will be taking practical steps in this financial year.
Mbekezeli, there's something that he speaks about. He talks about the leadership of the judiciary and referencing to the time when Mogoeng was speaking about the fact that they need to find each other and they need to perhaps think of a judiciary that is evolving and possibly now move towards that when it comes to the times. He says that maybe it's time for a retreat under the Chief Justice to then be able to pull together and find each other. But one wonders, though, with this evolution, where do they begin?
Yeah, I think the easiest place that they can start is that kind of retreat because, unfortunately, because the judges operate in their own provinces, they tend to sometimes fall into silos. And so it's quite important that they all come together and cast a single vision behind the Chief Justice, particularly because they will be taking on a huge responsibility with this judicial institutional independence. For example, if they move the magistrates' courts from the Department of Justice to within the office of the Chief Justice, that will be almost 3 billion rand undertaking. And so you do need for them to be on the same team and understand the same vision.
So there's a question that he was asked, and then he does speak about this issue, but I'm keen to hear your thoughts on how he answered this one. And this is around the fact that he wants to address the issue of powerful individuals who would then lash out at the judiciary when their cases don't go their way, for example. And then he also speaks about some lawyers that he says come into some of the cases to pick a fight with the judicial officers. Let's speak about how your perception of how he handled some of those issues.
Well, first of all, it was important to see a judge of that seniority speak out about what is a real threat to our judiciary. Of course, the judges and the judiciary is not beyond criticism, but that criticism must be fair, must be informed, and must be factual. And unfortunately, that's not what happens. People use the platforms that they get on social media and other media platforms to attack the judiciary, and it can't respond. And so it was important that Judge Mlambo articulates that and make practical proposals of how he will deal with that. There was another issue of the weaponization of the complaint system, both by legal practitioners and ordinary people. When they lose in court, you file a complaint against the judge. That, unfortunately, also harms the judiciary because suddenly judges get intimidated to take unpopular decisions, and that's really the beginning of the end of a judiciary.
And how did he handle, in your view, some of the sticking points, particularly around, you think about the issues of sexual harassment, you think about some of the questions that would have arisen even about the conduct of judges themselves?
Look, the point about the sexual harassment, he was able to deal with it quite easily because in the Gauteng High Court, they already pioneered a sexual harassment policy and they were implementing it. So he does have an experience around that. The one issue I think where he struggled to articulate himself well was on the issue of his approach to constitutional issues. Because in as much as he will be a leader in the judiciary, but his primary responsibility is to be the justice of the Constitutional Court. And so we need him to step up and give leadership, intellectual leadership at the Constitutional Court. And so we do hope that over time he'll be able to give more meat to what he put forward in the interview. And
especially because when those questions about Section 25 were popping up, you know, it was a lot to talk about there. But there is the issue of age, with some calling it possibly a short stint. Is it really?
Look, the way that he framed it was to say he's actually a transition candidate. He has the next 4 years to serve as Deputy Judge President, which will actually be, Deputy Chief Justice, but it will be at the midpoint of Chief Justice Maya's tenure as Chief Justice. And so whoever comes next will then be able to take on the baton from the Chief Justice and run with it. And so it does seem to say that he will be a continuity candidate. He will be working with the Chief Justice to make sure that the vision that they are casting will be carried forward even beyond their retirement.
Mbekezeli, there is something that you and I often talk about, and this is the issues of access to justice, because ultimately, yes, you can be at the Constitutional Court, but you need to ensure as well that access to justice is just as critical. But also another issue is ensuring that judicial officers themselves have enough resources to have research done for them, to have everything that they need, tools in hand. How important will it be for him to also tackle these particular issues, particularly for judges, so that they're not also always caught on the back foot when it comes to some significant judgments?
It is vitally important, Bongiwe. It actually is the make or break when it comes to access to justice. Money is an issue. We need more judges, and we need them as in yesterday. The Minister of Finance at his budget speech, he announced that there will be money that will be going to the Office of the Chief Justice and the Judiciary at the budget in October. And so it will be on the Chief Justice and Deputy Chief Justice to hold them, the executive or the minister, accountable for that money. The resources that the judiciary needs, the tools of trade. We shouldn't have judges struggling to get access to researchers or to libraries, because the longer the struggle is, the longer people wait to get justice in the courts. And so that is vital.
And it's something that Chief Justice Mogoeng also spoke about, which is around the time that sometimes it takes for people to get judgments. And that in and itself becomes a huge concern. Absolutely.
It's extremely unfair, Bongiwe, for people to wait until they die sometimes to get judgments out. We need judges to work hard, magistrates to work hard to deliver those judgments, but we also need to provide them with the necessary support, including, like I said, researchers, but also the question of remuneration. Unfortunately, it's not attractive anymore to be a judge just because they say it's an act of bankruptcy. We need to turn that around. We need good people, skilled lawyers to give up practice and become judges.
Finally, you get to come to studio. Thank you so much for stopping by. Appreciate your time. That was Judges Matter Researcher and Advocacy Officer Mbekezeli Benjamin.